Yes, I was born on the 21st of September 1932 in a place called Teplice-Schönau, Teplice-Schanov in Czech, and my name was Robert Joachim Neubauer. Teplice-Schönau, or Teplice, was part of Sudetenland, or in Bohemia. It was the north of Czechoslovakia. It was a spa town.
My father was also born in Brno, but later, and my mother was born in Austerlitz. Austerlitz is well known, only 20 kilometers east from Brno.
I was born in Bratislava in Czechoslovakia. I was, of course, only 9 when I left Czechoslovakia, so I have a child's memory, and I suppose with almost 70 years back, sometimes it may be a little hazy.
I was born in Uzhhorod, the former Austrian-Hungarian Empire, in 15th of June 1913.
We were living in a flat. It wasn't our own house, it was a flat, and I think it must have been quite a struggle bringing up 3 children. I don't know what kind of, as I say, I think he was, my father was some kind of an accountant, but I mean, we didn't have a car or anything like that, but we were a very happy family. Lived in the 2nd floor flat near a park. We enjoyed going to school. The address was 18 Havličková ulice in Pilsen. And I think I've already mentioned Granny Zsófi and her daughter Ada, our Auntie Ada, lived just round the corner. I think it was in Jagiellonska, where we used to go for piano lessons.
I grew up among a very large, extended family. The things that I remember well were on high days and holidays. We used to have to go, we didn't have to, but we went to the synagogue. And I always remember the synagogue because it was enormous. It was circular with the most beautiful chandelier in the middle. Its rites were, I suppose, more reformed than Eastern European Orthodox. It had a choir and it had an organ. And it's something that is embedded in my memory. I well remember it. All the men dressed in those days on Kol Nidre night in their top hats and dinner suits. And I well remember going with my grandfather, my uncles.
Well, my maternal grandparents, they were country people. Slavkov or Austerlitz is only a small town, and most people know each other. And my grandfather was a cattle dealer, and I remember going out with him to market to buy or sell cows, and I learned a lot from it. And at that time, of course, we didn't use cars. That is unknown, and that would have been when I was 6 or 7 years old. That was a terrible luxury which only a few people could afford. He walked to market, and it meant getting up very early in the morning and to go to market. And I went with him. And this is a wonderful memory I have, how he told me stories. And that was a time also when the first crystal set of a radio came out. And we had one, and we could hear as far back as from Brno. And he said, I just don't understand. If I speak here and I can hear also somebody speaking from Brno, how is it possible?
My grandmother actually used to stuff the geese with maize, because you see, if you make pâté de foie gras, you used to have to fatty livers. And I remember her sort of, in essence, sitting on the back of a goose, opening its beak and stuffing maize down. I have very clear recollections of that. But it was a very happy childhood. My recollections of the farm are that we certainly had a wooden seat lavatory where there was no running water, nothing like that. There was a stream near the house, and we used to go fishing for the little crayfish.
We had a very normal, middle-class family. We had always father provided the family well. He was the proprietor of a mineral factory, like soda water and other mineral things, mineral waters. And in a way we had, I think, prosperous living there. We had our own house. We had the factory, which at the time was, I remember as a young boy, I always enjoyed it to go out with the people who were working for my father on the delivery vans, which were drawn by horses. At the time, cars were not yet popular, not yet used. And so when I was allowed to drive, the delivery man was kind enough to take me along. So it was a great happening for me as a young boy.
The British Prime Minister at that time gave away Sudetenland, that sector. And then, of course, all Jewish children were thrown out of school. All Jews were thrown out of everywhere. And those non-Jewish friends that I had, and I had quite a number of them, they just disappeared, which I couldn't understand. My parents were, it was found very difficult for them to explain why I couldn't play with Hansi or Lottie or whatever their names were. And shortly afterwards, we moved because we moved to Prague, which was then and still an independent protectorate. It was on its own. Hitler had promised to leave it alone if he got Sudetenland. So the Germans came, we watched them come in.
Well, that was in 1939, 15th of March. I remember that very well. It was a very wintry day, and suddenly I was in Prague, and the German tanks started to come into Prague. Well, of course, I knew that I have to go further west. Now, suddenly the police headquarters was full up with people waiting for certificates. There were queues, thousands of people waiting there. And that was the middle of March.
Nearly every Jew was desperately trying to get exit visas and visas for countries. They queued outside the embassies. And I remember watching one of the queues, I can't remember which embassy it was, but they queued for hours and hours and hours trying to get a visa. Some of the embassies they queued outside, they hadn't even got a clue where the country was. I mean, they were queuing for places like Rhodesia, never heard of it. It was Zambia, not even Zambia, I can't remember where it was. They had no idea where these places were.
Obviously, we were aware that our parents were making preparations. They were telling us about going to England, and but we got the impression that we were going for an extended holiday and to learn the English language, because we hadn't learned any English. We just started learning a few phrases. I think one of the main phrases was, "I don't understand." And I think, I don't know about my brother, but I think if I had known the implication of going, I would not have left mother and father. But as children, we were quite excited and happy to come abroad, because it was put to us that we were coming to an aunt and uncle, in inverted commas, in England to learn English. I don't really know how my parents got to be accepted by Nicholas Winton groups.
Whilst I was studying medicine, my school friend and I had a holiday in France. I kept in touch with a French family. And then after I qualified, they invited me to come to France for a fortnight. But during that fortnight, the Munich Agreement was signed, and I wanted to go back home. And my father and mother bombarded me with letters, with phone calls. "Don't come back." And I said, "I have no work permit. I'm a visitor here. I want to work as a doctor." Oh. But he said over the phone, "You soon find work." And I know what he meant. He knew war was looming.
I met a colleague at the university, and he said, "Do you know that for students, the Gestapo has established an office in other part of Prague? If somebody wanted to get exit permits, then they issue there in that part, the part of Prague." So next day I was first thing with 2-3 other colleagues at the place which I was told, and really there was a Gestapo office, and that was early morning, about 8 o'clock already, or 7:30 or so on. And they started to work at 8. And then a black uniformed German comes out and said, "Jewish student to the police headquarters. So I knew that there it is almost hopeless. There were so many thousands of people. So I don't know what made me do it. I did, and my colleagues, they went away. I stayed there and I went in, and I said to the police, to the Gestapo, when I have planned to go to London to study English, and I need an exit for 3 months. So "Are you Jewish?" I said, "No, I'm not. I'm not gewiss nicht." So he gave me the permission.
My father was Hungarian, that was patently obvious. My mother was Austrian because she was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and there were no Czech citizens in those days. She was Austrian, and I was Czech because I was born in Czechoslovakia, although I had no Czech passport. So there were 3 nationalities involved. If one got one, the other one hadn't, and vice versa. Anyway, in the end, we did get a visa. We did get an affidavit from great uncle Ludwig, and we did get it.
So my aunt, my cousin and I left Czechoslovakia on the 28th of March, which already was 3 weeks after the Germans had marched in. And this was quite a traumatic journey. if you ask me if I remember saying goodbye to my parents, the answer is no. I have a complete blockage of most of those, what I call emotional situations. I can't remember. All I remember is we had a taxi which picked me up. My mother had packed a suitcase for me. Between the three of us, very clearly I remember we had 7 pieces of luggage, and we were driven to Vienna.
Well, I think Mother was so keen on us having a good wardrobe so that our foster parents wouldn't have to fork out too much money, that it was mainly clothes. I did bring a book with me, a book called Babička, which is a well-known Czech book. One thing I do remember that Mother packed for us, and that was a little sack, little bag of Czech soil. Czech soil just tied up the top, and a few photographs.
I had a friend there who was a goldsmith. We were allowed to go out with a small parcel, 10 marks, 10 marks or equivalent to 10 marks, and 1 ring. That goldsmith made me a ring, that ring here, which is on my finger from the end of March up till now. I can't take it off even now, you see. It was on me all that. That was that I thought, when it comes to it, and I will be very, very hungry once, I will sell it, flog it, and I will have something to eat from there. Well, it didn't come to it, luckily.
We were very aware of the different atmosphere on the train from Prague, which was a 3rd-class sort of train with wooden seats. And then there were German soldiers. Again, we were just told not to laugh or talk too much, and if they were around, when they were around. But then when we went over into Holland, the different atmosphere and the people coming on the train with drinks and cakes, remember that?
To me at that time it was a thrill. I mean, I'd never seen it. And after an hour or so, I remember my father took me on the deck and showed me buoys in the sea. And I could see these floating rubber things or whatever they were, and I didn't know what they were. And he explained that this was the border between England and the rest of Europe. Because unlike I had been well used to the borders between Czechoslovakia and Germany, or Czechoslovakia and Hungary, or Czechoslovakia and Russia, or Romania, or wherever, but it never occurred to me that the sea was a border. So we landed in Harwich. And I will remember these 3 big suitcases we'd got, and the customs official. My father didn't speak 1 word of English. I didn't speak 1 word of English, but my mother was a good linguist and spoke, well, I suppose, pidgin English. You could call it about 10 words of English. And the customs officials, we'd been used in Central Europe to deal with border officials and officials as being very autocratic, you know, yes, what do you want, no, this, that, and by command and everything else. These, I always remember, they were so polite, so, yes, madam, no, madam, thank you, madam, you know, it was just strange.
We arrived, like most other people, at Liverpool Street Station. It's always midnight. Every time we arrive, it's midnight. I don't know why, but it's midnight. And they threw the luggage out from the luggage van, and my aunt had a huge duffel bag into which she'd put all the family shoes for herself and her daughter. And this thing ripped, and there on the platform were all the shoes. That's my arrival at Liverpool Street Station. And I was found a family in Newcastle, a Christian family who were going to take me to look after me. And of course, retrospectively, I learned that these people had to put down £50 and guarantee you, and £50 was a lot of money. And I went to this marvellous family, and I have terrible guilt feelings about them, because I only stayed with them a month, not due to any fault of theirs. It was me. I was a 9-year-old child, almost 10, spoke no English, highly homesick. English buildings were totally alien to me. I'd come from a centrally heated, double-glazed flat. Here I was in a cold, draughty stone house. I'd never lived with pets. They had 2 huge Dalmatians that frightened the life out of me. I'd never eaten English food. Everything was wrong. I was cold, I was miserable.
When we arrived in London, of course, we had these labels that identified us, big labels with numbers on. Don't know what mine was, no. But then, apparently it was a Mr. Pomeranz in Sheffield who was the head of the Czech Jewish Refugee Committee organization. And he had a sister living in London, so he'd arranged for her to pick us up and put us on a train to Sheffield, because the Mulroy family, who were adopting Hans, lived in Rotherham, and the Crooks family that were adopting me were in Sheffield. Mr. Crooks was a headmaster of a junior school in Sheffield, and when he was approached, what this lady did who lived next door to him, she went round and she said, Mr. Crooks, knowing he was a headmaster, she said, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to read out this plea to your children, thinking, of course, maybe a family with a child that age would be willing, for at least temporarily, to give a home to a refugee child. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Crooks had 3 boys, and apparently they'd always wanted a little girl, but couldn't afford more than 3 children to raise. And they just looked at each other, apparently, and said, she's ours. Didn't let it go any further. Didn't announce it, just said, we are going to have that little girl.
We went to another place in south of London called Sete, S-E-T-E, which is an old harbour. And what was there? There was a big ship there, which has been requisitioned to transfer the Czech army to England. Of course, we didn't know this. We had no idea, but we joined this boat, and it was called Mohammed Ali El-Kebir, very famous. Fortnight later, we landed, you know where? In Liverpool. We landed in Liverpool. I still hadn't got a proper uniform, but we managed. And we went by train to Lime Street Station. And we're on the way, people were waving to us. They could see Czechoslovakia on most of, not on me, but other uniforms. And that was fantastic. And then we boarded a train and went as far as Beeston Castle. And from there we marched. Our luggage was taken on a lorry, but we marched to Cholmondeley Castle, Cholmondeley Park. Lord Cholmondeley has given his estate to the Czechoslovak army, and to be used there. We went under tents, and that's how we settled down in England.
Then I played with the children on the street, because everybody played on the street. You played cricket against the lamppost, which was the wickets. We played in the fields at the back, which belonged to a farmer who lived a few hundred yards away, whose 2 daughters I played with. I mean, they were among lots of other children. And my next door neighbour, they played, we all played together, football, cricket and all these things. And then they started asking me questions, you know, where do you come from? So I said, Czechoslovakia. They had no idea where it was. Then they asked, do we have dogs in that country? Yes, we do. Do they live in houses? Yes, we do. All sorts of questions, because in those days, refugees or foreigners were 1 in a billion. I mean, there were very, very few, and certainly in Leicestershire, there were very few in the countryside.
Soon after we arrived, of course, from Prague, or I arrived from Prague, and we stayed there for not very long, and I was sharing with a friend of mine he was a medical chap. Yes, we had some cash, as I said, we get some pocket money from the trust. Refugee Trust was very, very helpful. They really did give us a good start.
My identity, well, that's what it is. I'm a mixture. I'm a fair mixture. I'm Jewish, of course, first. Then comes English, and then comes Czech, I think.
Well, I must say both John and I, we felt more Czech than Jewish. We've always been very proud of being Czech.
This, I think, is one of the things which is inexplicable. I wasn't even 10, yet the nurtured years, 10 years there, have put a tremendous European inside me, not a British. Despite the fact I can't speak the language, I do not feel I have roots here. I've been married 55 years next month. I've been in England since 1939. I speak very good English, with many English attitudes, but I don't belong.
I would really like to stress the point that from our own experiences, I wish my brother was here to put his point of view, which might have been a little different from mine. But I know we have found, generally speaking, the English, the British people, extremely kind and extremely helpful. And I would like to say that I'm particularly aware of how kind non-Jewish people were, as far as we are concerned. The two families that adopted us gave us just unconditional love and opportunity for becoming part of the family and getting a good education. And I just can't say enough in praise of them in that way. We are very grateful to them.
I'm very, very, very much of an Anglophile. I must say that that was my biggest luck, that I decided not to go to the East anywhere, or not to go back, or not to go anywhere else, because some people went to France and somewhere else. Now, I must say that I'm very thankful to England that they gave me a refuge here, and I cannot really repay that in my life.
Only basically that my experience has been fairly gentle, in the sense that I was very, very lucky through this very lucky Hungarian passport to escape the real Holocaust, the camps, the death camps. But my life has altered, it did change, and I want people to know that this change need never ever have happened if people would have been more tolerant.